The alarm did not sound like danger. It sounded like a scream that had been going on for a long time before anyone noticed it. Danny Ortiz woke to it mid-jump, his fighter shaking as it dropped out of slip space, and for 1 second he thought it was his own ship falling apart around him. Then the noise steadied into something he recognized, an old signal pattern buried under 3 layers of static, half alien and half broken. His console tried to translate it and kept failing, throwing up fragments instead of sentences. Burning. Hold breached. Then, clearer than the rest, 2 words his translator finally caught clean. Children aboard. He sat up straight and killed the alarm with one hand, while the other pulled up the visual feed. What he saw did not look like a ship anymore. It looked like a ship's memory, a shape that used to be whole and was now just pieces holding on to each other out of habit. Fire bled orange light out of 3 long gashes along its side, and its name was still readable near the nose, painted in curling letters he did not know how to read. Underneath it, in smaller human script added later, someone had stamped a registration code. Civilian, unarmed, Threll. Danny knew that word. Everybody in this sector knew that word, and mostly what they knew was that it did not matter to them. The Threll were not allies. They were not enemies either. They were simply not anybody's problem, a small species with no fleet worth mentioning and no treaty with anyone strong enough to come running when they called for help. That was probably why nobody had answered yet. That was probably why, 6 hours from now, according to the automated response his own command was already sending back to him, somebody official finally would. 6 hours. Danny looked at the fire eating through the hull and did the math without wanting to. 6 hours was not a rescue. 6 hours was a headstone. Command's voice came through clean and calm, the voice of someone very far away and very safe. Hold position, Pilot Ortiz. Do not engage. Sanctioned response fleet is inbound 8 to 6 hours. Repeat, do not engage. He had heard an order like that before. He had followed it before once, and he had spent every year since then wishing he had not. He was not going to spend one more. He did not answer command. He just angled the *Coyote* toward the wreck and pushed the throttle forward. The *Coyote was not built for this. It was a fast little shuttle with a fighter's frame bolted onto a cargo hauler's guts, good for scouting and courier runs and not much else, but it had a working docking clamp and a hull that could take a few hits without folding, and right now that was enough to make it the only ship in range that mattered. Danny brought it in low along the wounded transport's spine, past a hole big enough to fly through if he had wanted to prove a point, and found a hatch on the underside still holding pressure. He burned his way through the outer seal and pushed inside wearing a suit 2 sizes too bulky for how fast he needed to move. The corridor beyond the hatch was dark except for emergency strips along the floor, dim red lines pointing toward nothing in particular. He followed them anyway, because red lines going somewhere were better than silence going nowhere, and because somewhere under all this metal there were supposed to be children. He found them behind a door that had been welded shut from the inside, which told him more than any distress call could have. Somebody in there had chosen to trap themselves rather than risk what was outside. He knocked, then remembered they probably could not hear a human knock the way a human would, and instead pressed his gloved palm flat against the metal and held it there. It took almost a full minute before the door cracked open. What he saw on the other side stopped him for a moment even through the suit's recycled air, and the smell of burnt insulation seeping in around the seals. The cargo hold had never been built to hold people, only crates, and now it was holding 247 of them, small and feathered and huddled together in nests made out of torn packing cloth, their eyes catching the low light in a way human eyes did not. 2 adults stood in front of the rest, thin and shaking, one of them holding a length of pipe like it was a weapon that might actually stop something. Danny raised both hands slowly, palms out. The oldest gesture there was for "I am not here to hurt you," and hoped it translated the same way across species as it did across nations. It must have, at least a little, because the one holding the pipe lowered it an inch. He did not have the words. His translator caught maybe 1 in 5 of what the older Thrall said to him in return, quick and urgent and full of clicks his ear could not follow, but he understood the shape of it well enough. How many can you take? Not enough. What happens to the rest? He looked past them at the children, at how many small shapes were pressed into that ruined hold, and he understood exactly how badly the numbers did not work. His shuttle was rated for 20. He had 247 behind that door and 2 adults in front of it, and a fire spreading through the ship's spine 1 deck at a time. Somewhere behind him, in a language he did understand, his own console pinged with an update from command, still waiting for an answer he had already given by not turning around. And somewhere farther out, past the drifting debris and the dying transport's cracked hull, 3 new shapes dropped out of slipspace in tight formation, their running lights arranged in a pattern Danny had seen only once before, in a briefing he had been told to forget. Not raiders, not scavengers looking for an easy kill. These ships carried a military insignia, clean and deliberate, the mark of a faction that did not see 247 Thrall children as people who needed saving. They saw cargo, and cargo in their eyes was simply something that had not yet been collected. The 3 ships did not fire right away. They simply arrived and arranged themselves and waited, and somehow that was worse than an attack. Danny Ortiz watched their formation through the *Coyote *S sensors and understood what he was looking at without needing a translator this time. That was not a rescue formation. That was a collection formation, the kind you used when you already believed the fight was over before it started. He turned back to the welded door, and the 2 Thrall adults still standing in front of 247 children, and he made a decision that would have gotten him laughed out of any tactics class he had ever sat through. He was not going to fly the children out. There was no ship in range that could carry them, not the *Coyote*, not anything. So instead he was going to bring the shelter to them, right here, inside the dying transport, and hold this spot for as long as it took. He went back through the hatch to the *Coyote at a dead run, suit boots clanging on the corridor floor, and started stripping the shuttle of anything that could seal a room. Emergency tents, patch foam for the hull breaches, every spare oxygen cell he had. He hauled it all back through the wreck in 3 trips, sweat soaking through the suit lining, while the fire crept closer along the ship's spine, and the older Thrall watched him with an expression his translator did not have a word for, something between hope and disbelief. While he worked, a voice cut into his comm that was not command's voice. It was steady and quick, a woman's voice, speaking Thrall first, and then switching to English a half-second later like she was translating for herself as much as for him. "My name is Laura Bennett," she said. "I work logistics out of the relay station 2 systems over. I speak Thrall. Command patched me in when they realized you were not answering them. You want to tell me what you think you are doing, Pilot Ortiz?" Danny kept working while he answered. "Buying time," he said. "Building a shelter. Is there anyone else who can reach this position faster than 6 hours?" There was a pause on the line long enough that he knew the answer before she gave it. "Not officially," she said, "but give me a minute." She did not sound like someone asking permission. She sounded like someone already breaking a few rules of her own, and Danny found that he liked her immediately. He had the tent sealed, and the patch foam curring along the worst of the hold's cracks by the time the enemy commander finally opened a channel. The voice that came through was smooth in a way that made Danny's skin prickle, the voice of a man used to people agreeing with him quickly. "Human pilot," the voice said, "you are interfering with a lawful collection operation. The cargo aboard that vessel is unregistered biological material and falls under recovery statute. Step away and you will not be harmed. This is the only offer you will receive." Danny looked through the ruined bulkhead at the small shapes huddled in the torn packing cloth, at eyes that were watching him now instead of the smoke, waiting to see what he would do. "That's not cargo," he said. "Those are children, and I'm not moving." The pause on the other end was short, almost amused. "Very well," the voice said. "Then you will be moved." The first attack run came less than a minute later, not aimed at the hold itself, but at the Coyote sitting exposed near the breach Danny had come in through. He sprinted back to it as the first shots hit, threw himself into the pilot's seat, and brought its weapons online with hands that had not stopped shaking since he first heard the words "children aboard." Flying inside a wreck was not like flying in open space. Every wrong turn was a wall. Danny used that, dragging the two attacking fighters through the transport's broken spine, forcing them to slow down or clip their wings on debris he had already memorized by feel. He was not trying to win. He did not have the firepower to win. He was trying to make himself the only thing worth shooting at, so that nothing else on this ship had to be. Laura's voice came back through, threaded with static from the interference. "I've got someone," she said. "Reservist pilot named Kevin Marsh, out of position but burning hard toward you. And there's a medical frigate under a captain named Nicole Ford. She's technically not supposed to enter a hostile zone, but she's already changing course. I told her it was a humanitarian relief situation. That part wasn't even a lie." "How far out?" Danny said, jerking the Coyote sideways as a shot passed close enough to rattle the hull. "Too far," Laura said honestly. "You have to hold." He already knew that. He had known it since he stopped listening to Command's order to wait. Holding was the whole plan. It had always been the whole plan. The enemy commander's voice returned once more, less smooth this time, edged with something that might have been irritation at being made to work for something he thought would be simple. "You cost us nothing by dying here, pilot," the voice said. "No one will remember one human who threw himself away for a cargo of aliens with no strategic value. Why do this?" Danny did not answer right away. He was too busy hauling the Coyote through a gap barely wider than its own wingspan, alarms screaming across his console, the fire behind him and the enemy ahead, and 247 small lives sitting in the dark at his back with nowhere else to go. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than he expected it to be, quiet the way truth usually was. "Because somebody has to be the one who doesn't wait for permission," he said. "And today, that's me." The enemy commander did not answer. Instead, Danny watched on his sensors as the two fighters harassing him peeled off and regrouped, and a new set of engine signatures lit up behind them, larger and heavier, moving toward the transport with the unhurried confidence of a force that had decided the games were over. They were not sending fighters anymore. They were sending a boarding party. Danny Ortiz had ejected once before, a long time ago, and he had been alive ever since to regret it. It came back to him now in pieces, the way old wounds do when something presses on them again. A different ship, a different order, a station full of miners who could not get clear in time, and a superior officer telling him to fall back because the numbers did not favor staying. He had listened that time. He had watched the station go dark on his sensors from a safe distance, and he had told himself for years afterward that following orders meant the deaths were not his fault. It had never once felt that way, not for a single day since. He was not going to feel that way again. That was the whole reason his hands were steady now, even though his ship was cracking around him, and a boarding party was closing in through the ruined hull. He pulled the Coyote back toward the cargo hold, using the transport's broken spine as a shield the way he had for the last 20 minutes, and dropped into the corridor outside the welded door just as the old Threll with the pipe came to meet him. Up close, in the dim red emergency light, Danny could see the Elder more clearly than before. Feathers gone gray along the crest, one eye clouded over with age, hands trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion that had been building long before today. The Elder spoke slowly this time, giving Danny's translator a fair chance to catch up. His name, when it finally resolved, was Ket Voss. "You cannot hold this corridor alone," Ket Voss said. "You are one, they are many, save yourself. The children will understand. They have already seen enough people leave." Danny checked the charge on his sidearm and did not look up right away. "That was the problem," he said. "I've been the one who leaves before. I'm not doing it again." Ket Voss studied him with the clouded eye tilted slightly, the way someone studies a stranger's face for a lie and does not find one. "Why?" he asked. "We are nothing to your people. We have no fleet, no treaty, nothing to offer you." Danny thought about the mining station going dark on an old sensor screen, about years of telling himself a lie that never once felt true. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "That's not why I'm here. I'm here because last time I left and it never stopped costing me. I'd rather it cost me something now, while it still might save somebody, than cost me nothing later while I just remember." It was not a speech. It came out rough and plain, more confession than declaration, and Ket Voss did not answer it with words. He simply reached out and pressed 2 fingers briefly against Danny's shoulder, a gesture Danny's translator did not explain and did not need to. Behind them, on the far side of the corridor, Laura Bennett's voice returned through the static, thinner now, stretched by distance and interference but still steady. "Kevin Marsh is closer than I thought," she said. "He owes you a favor from 3 years back, something about a supply run that went wrong. He didn't ask a single question when I called, just started burning fuel toward your position. Flight certification on his fighter is technically expired, for what that's worth." "It's worth a lot right now," Danny said. "There's more," Laura went on. "Nicole Ford's medical frigate changed course the second she heard the word children in Threll. She's calling it a humanitarian deployment. Her superiors are going to have questions later. She says that's a problem for later." "Good," Danny said, and meant it. Then the first impact hit the outer hull hard enough to shake dust loose from the corridor ceiling, and the boarding party breached. They came through a cutting charge 2 decks up, and the sound of it rolled down the corridor like distant thunder before the actual soldiers appeared, moving fast and organized in a way that told Danny this was not their first collection operation. He pushed Ket Voss back toward the welded door and planted himself in the middle of the corridor, sidearm raised, the only thing standing between 247 children and a squad that saw them as nothing more than paperwork to be finished. It was in that moment, boots pounding closer through the dark, that something happened Danny had not planned for and could not have asked for. Behind the welded door, one of the older hatchlings, barely more than a child by Threll standards but clearly closer to it than any of the others, pressed close to a control panel Danny had not even noticed was part of the hold. Small clawed hands moved fast over it, and a section of corridor beyond the boarding party's position hissed and vented atmosphere with a violence that staggered the front line of soldiers and bought several precious seconds. Danny did not know if the child understood exactly what that panel controlled or simply knew the ship well enough to guess. He only knew it worked, and that it terrified him almost as much as it helped, because if it had gone wrong, the ones hurt by it would have been the very ones he was trying to protect. There was no time to process that. The boarding party recovered fast, and the first of them reached the corridor's bend, weapon raised, close enough now that Danny could see the same insignia from the ship outside stitched onto their shoulder. The lights in the corridor flickered once, then failed entirely, plunging everything into the dying red glow of the last emergency strip still working. Danny raised his sidearm in the dark, planted his feet, and did not step back. Behind him, in the hold, 247 children went silent, waiting to find out if the one human who had refused to leave them was still standing between them and whatever came next. The first soldier came around the bend in the dark, and Danny Ortiz fired before the shape had fully finished turning toward him. The shot caught the edge of the boarder's shoulder plating and spun the figure sideways into the wall, and then the corridor filled with return fire that forced Danny back against the welded door, sparks biting into the metal an inch from his head. This was not like flying. Flying had distance in it, room to think, room to trade angles. This was close and loud and simple in the worst way, just him and a narrow hallway and however many soldiers were still coming, and behind him, 247 children who had nowhere left to retreat to. He felt the burn along his left arm before he understood he had been hit. It was not the pain that told him first. It was his hand losing its grip on the sidearm for half a second before he forced his fingers to close again. He pressed his back against the door frame and kept firing, kept the corridor's narrow bend working for him instead of against him, because as long as only one boarder at a time could round that corner, only one boarder at a time could actually threaten him. It still was not enough. He could hear more boots behind the first wave, unhurried, patient, the sound of a force that had numbers to spare and no reason to rush. Then the dark corridor lit up white for half a second as something screamed past overhead, close enough that Danny felt the pressure change through his suit, before he heard the actual sound of an old fighter's engines tearing through the breach in the outer hull. The boarding party's cover fire scattered, as return fire came from a direction they had not expected, from outside, from above, from a ship that had no business surviving a run like that. Kevin Marsh's voice cut through the calm, breathless and grinning even through the static. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Flight certs expired, engines held together with tape and hope, and I still made better time than your entire chain of command. Hang on down there." The fighter's strafing run did not win the fight by itself, but it broke the boarding party's rhythm, forced them to split attention between the corridor and the new threat outside, and that was enough of a gap for Danny to drag Ketvas back another few meters and reinforce the door with what little patch foam he had left. Then the whole ship shuddered under an impact that felt different from anything before it, heavier, deliberate, and Danny's sensors, patched through from the asterisk coyote even from this distance, showed him something that did not make sense at first. A medical frigate, unarmed by every specification on record, had put itself directly between the transport and one of the enemy's smaller escort ships, and it was not drifting there for cover. It was ramming. Nicole Ford's voice came through next, clipped and furious in a way that suggested she had already had this argument with her own crew and won it. "We don't have weapons rated for combat," she said, "but we have mass and momentum and a captain who is done asking permission. Hold on down there, pilot. We are making a very large and very expensive point." The frigate's crew, Danny would learn later, had spent the last 10 minutes stripping emergency flare charges and reworking them into something that punched a lot harder than they were ever designed to, and firing them out of cargo tubes never meant for weapons. It was not elegant. It worked anyway, forcing 2 more escort ships to break formation and deal with an ambulance behaving like it wanted a fight. In the corridor, the pressure finally eased. The boarders, caught between a reinforced human position, they could not break quickly, and outside support arriving faster than their own reinforcements, began pulling back toward the breach they had cut, more cautious now than aggressive. The enemy commander's voice returned one final time, and for the first time since this had started, it had lost its smoothness entirely. "This was not supposed to cost this much," the voice said. "One pilot, one unarmed transport. Explain to me why you would let this cost you everything for cargo that offers you nothing in return." Danny slid down against the door frame, one hand pressed to the burn along his arm, and looked back through the gap at 247 small shapes still huddled where he had left them, alive, watching him with eyes that had not looked away once. "They're not cargo," he said again, quieter this time because he no longer had the strength to say it any louder and because he no longer needed to. "They never were, and you don't get to decide what they're worth. I already did that part." There was a long pause on the line, long enough that Danny thought the channel might have simply dropped. Then, without another word, the enemy ships began to withdraw, pulling their boarding party and their escorts back toward the larger vessels waiting at a distance, unwilling to keep paying a price that kept climbing every minute they stayed. Danny watched them go on the last working display in the corridor, and felt every part of the last hour catch up with him at once, the adrenaline draining out through the burn in his arm and the ache in his legs, and the simple, overwhelming fact that he was still breathing. Ketvas lowered himself carefully beside him, feathers matted with dust, and said nothing for a long moment. Then, in Threll, slow enough that the translator caught every word clean, he said something Danny would carry with him longer than the injury. "You did not wait," Ketvas said. "You did not wait for permission, and you did not wait to be certain it would work. You simply stayed." Danny closed his eyes, listened to the sound of children beginning, cautiously, to breathe easier behind him, and let himself finally stop holding the line he had built out of nothing but refusal. Danny Ortiz woke up to the sound of a medical monitor beeping somewhere near his head, and before he opened his eyes, before he even remembered where he was, he asked the only question that mattered. "The children," he said, his voice cracked and dry. "How many?" A woman's voice answered him, calm and a little amused, the voice of someone who had clearly been waiting for that exact question. "All 247, she said. "Every one of them accounted for. A few of the older ones got hurt when they vented that corridor section, some minor injuries, nothing that won't heal. You can open your eyes now, pilot. I promise the news doesn't get worse from here." He opened his eyes to a small medical bay, clean and humming with the quiet efficiency of a working frigate, and found himself looking at a woman with short dark hair and tired eyes who introduced herself as Nicole Ford, captain of the vessel that had rammed an enemy escort ship with nothing but flare charges and stubbornness. She looked exactly like someone who had spent the last several hours making decisions she would have to explain to a review board later, and had decided that was a problem for a future version of herself to handle. "You rammed a warship with an ambulance," Danny said. "Technically a medical frigate," she said, "and technically I informed my superiors it was a humanitarian deployment. The ramming part came up organically." He almost laughed, and the effort of it pulled at the bandage along his arm enough to remind him he had been shot. He let the laugh go anyway. It felt earned. Laura Bennett arrived not long after, still in her logistics uniform, looking like she had not slept and did not particularly care. She sat down at the edge of his bed without asking and said, before he could speak, that his chain of command was, in her exact words, extremely displeased, and that a formal hearing had already been scheduled to review his decision to disobey a direct order, divert unauthorized assets, and initiate an intervention on behalf of a non-aligned species without clearance. "That sounds bad," Danny said. "It might be," she said, "or it might not be. I intend to make sure the second option wins." The hearing, when it came, was smaller and quieter than Danny had expected. A handful of officers in a plain room asking questions in flat, careful voices about protocol and precedent, and the diplomatic complications of intervening in a collection operation run by a faction with its own standing government. Danny answered honestly, without trying to make himself sound better than he had been, because he had stopped needing anyone's approval somewhere back in that dark corridor and did not feel the need to start looking for it now. It was Laura who changed the room. She stood, laid out exactly what 6 hours of waiting would have meant in plain, unemotional numbers, described the transport's failing structural integrity, the spreading fire, the total absence of any other force in range, and finished by simply asking the panel what number of dead children they would have found acceptable in exchange for following procedure to the letter. Nobody answered that question out loud. Nobody needed to. In the end, Danny was not given a medal, and he was not thrown out either. His file received an official reprimand for disobeying a direct order, a line of text that would follow him for the rest of his career, sitting right next to a quieter, unofficial understanding among the people who had actually been there, that he had done exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. He was reassigned, not punished so much as relocated somewhere his instincts would raise fewer questions, and he found, to his own mild surprise, that he did not mind. What mattered more to him happened 3 days later, on the observation deck of Nicole Ford's frigate, where Ketvas found him sitting alone and asked if he could join him. The old Threll's clouded eye had cleared somewhat with proper medical care, and he moved with less pain now, though the exhaustion in him still ran deep. "The elders have spoken," Ketvas said, settling beside Danny. "Among our people there is a word, difficult to translate cleanly, for someone who is not born Threll but is nonetheless kin. Guardian kin is the closest your language comes. It is not given easily. It is not given at all most years." Danny did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and let Ketvas continue. "The children wanted you to know first," Ketvas said, "before the ceremony, before anything official. They wanted you to hear it from them." As if summoned by the words themselves, a small shape came around the corner of the observation deck, one of the older hatchlings, the same one who had worked the corridor's vent controls in the dark without being asked. The child approached slowly, uncertain, clutching something small in one clawed hand, and stopped a few feet from Danny before speaking a single word, careful and deliberate, clearly practiced. "Danny." It was not perfect. The accent bent the sounds in a way no human throat would, but it was unmistakably his name, and it was the first word Danny had ever heard a Threll child say to him directly instead of through a translator. He found, sitting there with his arm still healing and his career quietly altered, and 247 small lives sleeping safely somewhere below decks because he had refused to leave them, that he did not have anything clever to say back. He simply said the child's name in return, the one Ketvas had given him earlier, and watched the small shape's crest feathers lift in something that looked unmistakably like a smile. Later that night, with the observation deck quiet and half the hatchlings curled up asleep around him in a loose, trusting circle, Danny looked out at the stars and thought about a mining station that had gone dark years ago, and a promise he had made himself without ever saying it out loud. He had not waited for permission this time, and looking at the small sleeping shapes around him, breathing slow and safe in the dark, he understood, with a certainty that settled something old and unfinished inside him, that he never would again